Hello, everybody. First of all, I'm very happy to see so many faces and must say this hopefully will be a very nice evening we spend together, and I hope I won't bore you taking you through the process and our learning curve. I would like to follow up by sharing that a big motivation for me to start this project has been a conversation I have had with Chris Murray, actually, the man speaking just before you, in 2012. But let me get back there just now. Before I start, I would like to warn you, I am not a conservationist or a biologist. There are so many great people doing talks here. So I don't really qualify through being a scientist. I wouldn't necessarily describe myself as an expert when it comes to the topics that I will be talking about with you today. And also, I have never lived in the Congo. So yet I am the producer and one of the initiators, together with my colleague Eva Vonk, of the Congo Tales project. And I would like to share my or our Eva insights we had during the process of conceptualizing and producing this first chapters of our Tales of Us initiative. The Congo Tales project is the first pilot of our Tales of Us initiative, which is a multimedia project that takes a new approach to communicating the urgency of protecting the world's most powerful and fragile ecosystems and the people who call them home. Now, before you consider tuning out, I would like to say that I'm also a trained actress, at least, and I do work in film business. So Eva and I, we try not to bore you too much. And if so, I do a little bit of jazz hands in order to keep the entertainment going. But let's get started. As the daughter of quite an important key figure in the efforts to conserve the Congo Basin, a woman most of you might have heard of before, Sabine Plattner, I have always been aware that I have quite some big shoes to fill if it comes to nature conservation efforts. When I joined my mother on one of her many journeys to the basin, I was first of all overwhelmed with so many new impressions, and also flabbergasted by the first impression I got from the Congo Basin, since it wasn't what I've expected, but I will get to that later. While my mother and her team had meetings all through the day, Chris Murray took me aside one moment and started a conversation with me, or perhaps I should say I got captivated by one of his passionate monologues. And right at the end of one of these monologues, he directed something very personally towards me, as he pointed out that I will have to take responsibility over conservation efforts too, as it was my generation that would have to continue this work for the generations to come. He said, Steffi, you as the young generation, you will have to follow of what we are doing here, because you are the next generation to come. And I remember that very well. I have just back then founded a film production company and was busy preparing my first feature film. And whilst I was listening very quietly to what Chris was saying, I have to admit my first thought was, whoa, how would I handle this obligation time-wise, and what exactly could my assignment be? Well, Chris gave no further insights, but left me with the feeling, and this might be the way I perceived it due to my own convictions back then, that I should do something, anything, from the privileged position I had in life. So I decided that creating something with our media tools in order to create more awareness for the Congo Basin should somehow be implementable in our working situation and could be an assignment that could be of help. So on my way back in the plane already from this trip to Congo, where Chris talked to me, I talked to who is now my husband. Back then he was still my boyfriend, but already my partner in our film company, Ekram, about what Chris said, and that I do consider helping them, but it became clear quite quickly that we did not want to choose the normal or conservative road of filmmakers doing a documentary, which is pretty linear and would be broadcasted. And as I said, since I come from classical theater background, I had the feeling it had to do with basic storytelling of the people in the communities, since I had the strong belief it is stories that connect people with each other and their culture. Furthermore, it became clear that we wanted to reach especially that young generation Chris was referring to when we had the talk. We wanted to reach out to this young generation as an audience. So it was storytelling, not a linear documentary, and reaching out to a young audience. But more than this, I couldn't designate yet. So upon returning to Germany, I turned to one of my producers who was working for me at Storming Donkey Productions, Eva Vonk. She's on the right here in the picture. Still very young, which she was back then and still is today, of course, but also still quite new to the film business. But although she was new to the film business, she was highly interested in finding ways to combine the art of storytelling with the power of innovative ways of marketing, finding channels to reach especially a young and in their consumer ways, fast-changing generation. And together we ended up developing and producing the Congo Tales series. And here we are today. This series was released in 2018 and has enjoyed a great international response. I have to say, we are still overwhelmed by the outcome of this project. The multimedia outcomes were exhibited and broadcasted from the US to Korea, from the Netherlands to Australia. And it is safe to say that the people of Mbomo, the region within the rainforest of the Congo Basin, traveled the world with our project. And the media turned it into an international news story, with one of the highlights being that the project and so the people of the Congo Basin, the community in Mbomo, ended up on the cover of the International New York Times. Down here on the left, you see the story of the sun and the mole, which is an authentic story from this region. Now, seeing this international engagement with content from this ecological wonderland would be a way to conclude that our mission to create an awareness campaign has been successful. Yet, what has become far more important than gaining this success has been gaining more understanding concerning my responsibility as a content creator for this sort of topics. And this is the learning curve I want to share with you. I've had the privilege to work and educate myself for the past 5 years through this project, and would like to address some of the biggest lessons I've learned. The story I would like to share with you is about how I've learned in my process of trial and error to gain authenticity, mostly by listening. It is about how I feel that first and foremost I became, and I still am, a student of these projects, more than a maker or producer of these projects. I am truly, and so does Eva see it, a student of these projects. It is about how environmentalist activism should be inclusive, and about the role of members of more privileged layers of society should act in order to amplify voices of those that often remain unheard. when we started the development of this project, Eva and I quickly agreed that we did not want to zoom in on any negativity concerning Congo, nor do another wildlife animal documentary about the region, because for us, this would have meant to only gain and exploit content in Odzala in order to consume it in our world. So we would take there and give here in our world. We were looking for maybe, say, multi-dimensional exchange methodology. Sounds smart, right? This is something I think we even put on a whiteboard right in the beginning without having a clue what we were talking about and where this journey would take us. But in hindsight, I have to say this is what it truly has become, a multidimensional exchange methodology. But back then, for us, the picture was we wanted, or the metaphor was, we wanted to build bridges. We wanted to not only create awareness, but also leave something behind, or shall I rather say, ignite awareness on both sides, the Congo Basin with its people, and back in our world, the European Western world. So shortly after I had visited the national park, I was able to send Eva to Congo too. I had the urge to send her to Congo in order to experience the Congo personally, since I knew nothing could describe the region better than their own subjective experience. And funny enough, we both, or not very surprisingly actually, we both had a very similar experience during our journeys. The Odzala Park was a vast, ecological, untouched wonderland with incredibly kind inhabitants that had been living in harmony with their surroundings for centuries. So this experience had an enormous contrast with our prior ideas about that country. We both had done some superficial research on Google, and I tried to find a little tourist guide about the Republic of Congo. And the vast majority of information that can be found online actually zoom in on negative narratives. So it was only perpetuating stereotypes and creating a very limited image of Congo, especially the Republic of Congo. We felt that our efforts should be dedicated to creating a more complete narrative of the Congo that will inspire hope and can change a negative perception. So we did not want to zoom in on a negative or threatened subject, as we thought it would become yet another scaring or alienating piece of content, and we wanted to bring the world a little closer together. It might sound very naive and idealistic, but as I said, we wanted bridges to be built between cultures. So we started brainstorming numerous topics for potential documentaries or some sort of call to action campaign series passed by. The vast biodiversity of the landscape, the traditional use of the medicinal plant, iboga, I think it's called, the amazing wildlife of rare species such as the lowland gorillas and the silverbacks, the still ongoing national suppression of various ethnic groups, the presence of Chinese mining along the road and the higher number of road signs written in Mandarin found there than any other language of road signs in the country. The vain dystopian city built by the president to pretend financial prosperity, just to name a few. So intuitively, we decided that we would not be able to gather enough understanding of these topics to create authentic and properly educated content of these matters within a realistic time frame. We needed more time. This became clear in after the first journey Eva had to the Congo when she came back, and we had our first meetings afterwards. So as such, I decided to make it possible for Eva to undertake several research journeys to the National Park Odzala, where she could study initiatives of my mother's NGO on various sites spread throughout the park. This is on the picture, you see the Santa Mobimba kindergarten, where Eva has been many times during her research, working together with the educators, with the children, being led by the children through the village to find in order to find stories, and actually where I also ended up luckily producing the movie The Little Fish and the Crocodile with these wonderful children. I will show you later. I will talk about this later. This NGO of my mother has a special focus, for you who are not acquainted with it, on education and conservation combined with early childhood development. And as such, Eva spent a lot of time with local educators and the children of the communities of the villages. This allowed us to become students of this place in a way that the youngest members of societies are. Many teachings deeply implemented the art of storytelling. We discovered that mythologies shared in the oral culture in this region are an important way to share values and important teachings, and that most of the stories weren't written down at all. It was still quite a strong oral tradition. Upon realizing this, we set out on a mission to collect myths, folk tales, and other stories passed on from generation to generation in this area in an oral tradition. We came up with specific modules for our work and allowed ourselves time to delve into them and recruit a team of contributors that were going to help us finding the best ways to transmit these stories to international audiences. So you have to imagine Eva traveling back and forth, bringing, collecting stories in the village with pencil and paper, with some people coming with her. The first journeys were you were all by yourself, Eva, and then there came Tina and different members of the team. This all, it was really the time we gave ourselves was probably one of the main catalysts to our success later on. So if I kept traveling back and forth to Mbomo, and each time she would return with handwritten stories that were collected by local contributors from the Mbomo region in the Odzala Park. It was people who were working with the SPEC initiative already, people that Eva got to know in her first journey there, so she built her own network. We involved the local radio station, and slowly but surely the community engagement grew greater and greater, and we were able to build a network within the community. I remember that when Eva got back to the office with these stories from her trips, there was a great familiarity when reading these stories once they were translated, because they usually came in Lingala or French, or had to be translated from Lingala to French, from French to German or English. And one of the most important common denominator in all these stories was that we must respect Mother Nature and that we cannot change her laws. This seemed to be the common denominator. And this is, I'm sure we all agree, an universal truth. So there we had it, how to build bridges between an audience and this region. Over time, we were invited to traditional storytelling rituals with various cultural groups in and around Mbomo, and set up after school workshops with kids on character design and storytelling within the school program and the kindergarten program. And I have to say, it was an indescribable feeling to see how this mission to find tales become a conscious collective effort and expanded our horizon with every trip. But it was also somehow, for us, sad to see the surprise and wonder of the people when they really understood we wanted to learn from their stories. And it took us quite a while to not to gain their trust, but to ignite their self-esteem in a way that their stories are actually, and the way they tell it is actually interesting for us. So eventually the favorite story of the children was carefully turned into an experimental short for kids that follows the children whilst they perform this story.
Soki olingi kosala mokili ya sika, okokatisa na katikati ya zamba monene, okomona na miso ya bana mike.
I have directed this film, and with a very small crew, which functioned mostly as observers, whilst the children took us along into their fantasy world. We, in the pre-production phase, conceptualized it in a way that we could make sure that the children would not feel intimidated by a film crew, that we would train our crew to behave accordingly. I just give you an example of like usually a film production is quite a stressful setting, and time is money, and the cameraman shouts something and the director says no, but we have to keep on going because the sun's dropping. So this had all to be anticipated, not only in the working method but even in the script, in order to take this pressure away. And also, what if some kids won't show up, won't be able to say any lines. So we tried to conceptualize this and take this into consideration already, just to give you an understanding of how we, whilst working on the first project, tried to implement certain methodologies already. Throughout this process, I and our European team all were very often confronted with the way our minds were conditioned, especially in the pre-production phase, when we first heard of the story of the little fish and the crocodile. Because as many other stories from this region, it did not have a happy ending. And here in Europe, the Western world, we are very used to happy endings, especially if it's content that you create for children or children audience. And we had meetings where the talks always ended up in, but the crocodile and the fish, they become friends, and then the crocodile eats the fish's eggs. That's horrible. That's no happy ending. You cannot show this film to kids. So we were debating if we could change the story, if we should change the story and the authenticity of the story, because it puzzled our perception and our education of story. So now, thankfully, we also had several members in our crew that may have been a little further advanced as I was back then. And one artist who also has seen the region already and has supported us with the workshops given to some of the children and educators in Beaumont. She reached out to me and said, very frankly, you have a Walt Disney mindset. Please try to let it go and just listen. And now I would like to show you a little part of the film, but I think video is not working, if I understood this correctly before the, is it? Yes, you see some films. Yeah, this is the little fish. So we've worked we tried to, everything that you see in this film comes from the region. So we've tried to work with plants that were surrounding the children, with a whole educational program around it. The whole makeup is based upon traditional patterns. The kind of plastic shimmery fish costume triangles you see in the background is carpets that we've bought on markets in Brazzaville. So we tried to implement all these thoughts about conservation into the production of this movie. So I could go on and tell you many anecdotes about this film shoot and my personal experience, but maybe I'll postpone that to later. And if you have any questions later, I'm more than happy to answer. And so is Eva, I'm sure. But there came the next level to this process, because now seeing that we had collected so many stories, we felt we had to find a way to document these in a way. And not in the last place, after a very valued member of our local team quoted a proverb which reads, "If an old person dies, it is if as a library of knowledge burns," meaning if an old person dies, this person's gonna take away all the stories that are right here in its head, and it cannot be told anymore. He used this proverb to share how much he had been enjoying the process of logging these stories with and for us, and to emphasize how important he found it. So we then came up with the idea to create a book out of these stories and to illustrate them with staged pictures in which the people would become the actors in their own stories. In order to find a more unique way, the documentation of these tales, we decided to approach a photographer who normally uses his craft to photograph some of our current day's biggest superstars. He took photos of Lady Gaga and some covers of the Vogue, many people who you would call VIP in our world. And this photographer, Peter Henkert, is known for his epic staged pictures that tell big stories in a cinematographic frame. This juxtaposition now provokes the interest of media outlets that wouldn't quickly cover anything about folk tales from a rainforest. So this was kind of a marketing move we had quite in the beginning of the concept. So why did a celebrity photographer go to Congo? And I have to say it worked out really well in the end. Now, having chosen to enable such an uncommon collaboration to happen, I was thankfully made aware of the dangers of appropriating cultures and did not want to risk ending up exploiting the communities that I was so privileged to learn so much from. Eva and I have tried to always surround ourselves with contributors that allowed us to see that oftentimes environmental activism excludes local communities. And I have to say these efforts, without bragging, but I hope to show you our learning curve in this way. Whilst we were rolling already and producing and traveling back and forth to the Congo, we had to find these contributors on site, kind of, because we couldn't find any information about the country Republic of Congo, or not the one we were looking for. So how would we be able to find experts in this? And we were still educating ourselves on all these topics. So only whilst we were educating ourselves, we knew who to look for. And then sometimes by chance, we got introduced to someone who was a perfect fit. For example, our great author, Kofo Nsonde. I don't know if he's here, Eva. I think he wasn't able to join, unfortunately. So where was I? Yes, we did not want to appropriate cultures or people at all. So we surrounded ourselves with contributors and experts in this field. And an important proverb my organization still stands by today is nothing about us, without us, can be for us. We were introduced to the importance of intersectional activism, which means that we advocate for both the protection of people and the planet. We see the importance of identifying which injustices are happening to marginalized communities and that this is interconnected. And I would like to read a quote to you now, since it is not my words, but I highly appreciate this quote. "We are in the business of telling stories. The stories we tell have the power to connect people, share ideas, and make the world a better place. They also have the power to do the opposite. The responsibility of being a trusted storyteller means that there is no place for stereotypes, assumptions, or misrepresentation." And this is something, theoretically, it seems pretty simple and pretty clear, but in a working process where you have to also check a lot of other boxes, you have to work very thoroughly in order to always take the other perspective and see if you do perpetuate stereotypes or if you come up with assumptions that could be misread or misinterpreted. So these first outcomes are only the beginning of our work. Some pictures of the Congo Tales book and some film stills of the short. We believe we can create many more bridges through this storytelling methodology and this understanding of how to develop these stories together with the community and an NGO. And we believe we can create many more bridges and have the social responsibility to do so even. Having been born into the situation that I am in, I'm trying to devote myself to activate my privilege to the benefit of others. And I hope to do so many years to come. By doing so, I hope to pave the way for a more empathetic exchange and foster interest in our cultural and natural environment. The COVID crisis has inspired me to create a series called Tales at Home. And it actually shows that this concept of storytelling and connecting people is the right way to go, since the corona pandemic showed us we are social beings and we need a connectedness. So when we were talking in the beginning of lockdown, mid of March, we were actually talking about illustrations by one of our art directors who have worked on the photo project. And he made beautiful illustrations of the stories that we have collected. And I said to Eva, this is so beautiful. We are all in lockdown mode. We cannot do our next chapter, which would have been Romania Tales. We cannot travel anywhere for research. Let's use this content in order to create something digitally. And this is when we were inspired to create the series Tales at Home. And it starts with first 3 episodes about the Congo Basin. And it is a combination of animation of these beautiful illustrations with a moderator that will be a superstar in Germany, the Netherlands, English speaking, and I think we have a French version soon to come, who will take the kids through an educational entertainment program and follow the story of Akesi, a young boy who just lost his brother and will travel from Brazzaville to the Congo Basin and experience several adventures and learn something about nature and its laws. Yeah, so please check it out. This is the next level. I don't know how I'm doing time-wise. I think I will round it up slowly but surely. I hope I haven't overwhelmed you with information. Still, I have the feeling I'm missing out so many personal anecdotes, but maybe the Q&A is good for that. But to close this whole thing, I would like to, I don't know if it's the right platform that allows me to thank people. I know this might not be the Academy Award audience here for thank you speeches, but still I would like to do it because it also says something about the process. First of all, I would like to thank you, Chris Murray, for making me aware of the fact that we all, especially the younger generation, are in charge, and that we carry a responsibility to create an awareness for the urgent topics concerning nature conservation, and that we shouldn't be overwhelmed by the duty to do so, but rather be intrigued to face a superb learning curve about this wonderful planet we are living on, and should not be afraid at all to embark a journey in any matter to do so and to protect our beautiful planet. Secondly, and yes, now it will become a little Academy Awardee. I would like to thank my mother because, no, seriously now, because it was basically her vision and her initial methodology of combining early childhood development with nature conservation that gave this great base to the start of our project, because we based everything upon this methodology and had her whole network to build upon. So we try to enhance this methodology through our process, and through her way of understanding conservation can only be done by implementing community work and early childhood development. We had the best base, so thank you. And thirdly, I would like to thank a person who was supposed to do the talk with me, but I have to defend this wonderful woman, Eva Vonk. You can unmute yourself now in case you want to defend yourself. But she has done so many other talks on PBS and radio and newspaper whilst I was having my second child. So it's my duty to do the talking today. But I want to thank Eva, who is my partner in crime in this whole project, and wonderfully humble, but highly talented and committed producer. She sits quietly here in this talk, while she was the one who executed most of this project's visions and also implemented her own ideas and ideals. The success of these projects is mainly due to the fact that Eva, from beginning onwards, trained herself tirelessly. And this was long before the media picked up these topics this presently, to check all the boxes with these projects in order not to appropriate the stories or culture, to implement the people by choosing the right experts, looking at our diversity of the team up to teaching partners in the international museum world, of what can be said and what cannot be said anymore without appropriating these people's stories. So you really threw your heart out there also for the people of Mbomo, Eva, and I would like to thank you deeply. So this is, I guess, what I would like to address to you, no matter in what expert field you work in that brings you to this talk. But what we have learned on our way is when you go somewhere unknown, so to say, to work on a subject, always include the community surrounding it. Listening to the people and get to know their culture, because only by listening you can learn, no matter how much expertise you bring along. If you don't listen, you will not be able to grow. So this goes for the moment when you arrive, but also for the process along. Listen to the surroundings. Listen. Thanks for listening.
Now I have unmuted myself and would like to add a few small things to the beautiful talk of Steffi. It's still very interesting for me to listen to this story, because it's such an amazing journey that we've been on for this last few years, and think about how this process is actually started with Stefanie's mother, but then also with Stefanie herself, because I do believe that it takes a lot of courage to fill these shoes, so to say, the big shoes of your mom. And I think that you can be very proud of yourself for doing this in your very own and authentic way. And I'm extremely proud of having been on this journey with you and sitting here as an audience and listening to this overview. And there's so much more that we can tell you about everything that we've learned. I think Steffi has only been able to touch the surface of this incredible journey, off of which we both have been students, as Stefanie mentioned. But the things we have learned, we're incredibly eager to share with you. So if the two men that we've also listened to a lot over the years, Chris Moraes and Paul Telfer, would take over again, maybe we can start a little interactive part during which we hopefully can share a little bit more and yeah, keep learning together. There's a question about purchasing the book, and the book is actually available on all big sales platforms such as Amazon or Barnes and Nobles. I think it's available in South Africa, but I'd have to check that. And to be honest, you might have to be fast because we're selling out the third print of the book at this point, which is incredible. There's been thousands of books sold at this moment, which is amazing to know that these stories have traveled through so many households in the form of a book that is now on a shelf where people get to engage with the stories whenever they'd like.
Guys, thanks very much for the talk. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions. I didn't pick up, how long exactly were you in Congo for, and from, you know, like a time period? And then in terms of what do you anticipate the income is likely to be from your film, and is there a way that you're able to route that back to the people themselves?
Question, the process of work from the first journey till kind of doing the exhibition in the region as the first world premiere took us 5 years. And this means going back and forth for several journeys. I think in total it must have been 7 or 8 journeys for several weeks.
Wow.
Yeah, we actually also separated every journey, so we would go back and forth around about a month, 2 to 4 weeks at a time, and did the film in 4 weeks process, and then did another 4 weeks with our photography team, and then spend, I think, around 6 months for the post-production and the distribution plan. And a big part of the distribution plan was actually thinking about our social business model, which is, I think, good that you asked this question, because we've always really tried to keep in mind that any proceeds resulting from this work should actually benefit the authors of the story rather than our initiative or our organization. So what we've now done is the first edition prints of all these photos, for example. They are in the photography world a quite important print, because there are only a certain amount of print that will be made of each photos, an artist-proof print, so to say. And the first editions of these photos that were exhibited in the museum in Barberini, for example, have been auctioned in a very special auction that was organized together with Christie's. And during this auction, we actually raised funds to bring back to the village, to Mbomo. And with these proceeds, we are running cultural programs. So we make sure that the radio station, which was one of our biggest allies during the collection of the stories and during the production of the film and the photo series, will be able to continue to run. And we will also continue distributing the Lingala version, the local version of the book for schools and cultural organizations in Congo. So whatever proceeds result from this work is being reinvested in specific programs within the Congo.
Thank you for that. And if I can ask another question, if there aren't any others coming up, in terms of actually flighting the movie to the people themselves, have they had an opportunity to see themselves in the movie? I'm sure it must have been something quite moving and emotional for them to witness.
It was, and it was actually a time during which Steffi was highly pregnant. So we only had a digital video version of Steffi along with us, but we brought a battery-powered beamer that we then projected on improvised big open-air drive-in cinemas in Mbomo and in Brazzaville for the community to see this movie. And we're actually, you know, prior to the pandemic, we're planning to do another edition of the exhibition in Brazzaville, but also in Kinshasa, because there's also been lots of demand for the project in the Democratic Republic. However, we'd had to shelve these plans, but the film has been shown and has been made available, and will also continue to be made available in the near future once we're able to pick up on our plans from pre-corona, so to say. I think a very important part of the work of the SPEC, of the Siberian Plattner African Charities, has been really paying attention to humanitarian efforts whilst working on conservation efforts. And as such, we've also been quite lucky to work with part of Sabine's team that was, amongst others, made up of people that were very well acquainted with social science. So it allowed me the possibility, which Steffi enabled, to gain a better understanding of the social science towards social work and the psychology behind it. So we really made sure that we had the right consultants and the right allies on our team, as to not allow for jealousy, or as to not introduce a certain culture, or even as to not disrupt the local economy. Because of course we kept in mind that we might be lucky enough to gather proceeds, but how do you distribute these proceeds? Isn't there a risk to actually destroy local economy, or to disrupt it in a way that actually leaves a very negative effect? So the time that Steffi, for example, has allowed me to work on this project and to keep traveling back and forth, which I've till this day have done more than 10 times, really allowed me to kind of, you know, have my own trial and error in this process, because we're all human beings. So we need time to gain understanding. And in our way, this was our early childhood development into creating media content with these kinds of topics. So we had thought of a mentor program, but then you really have to keep in mind that you then introduce a culture where you come with a film set and you establish, or you manifest something as superior. Whereas we'd rather wanted to pay attention to the local culture and to the structures that were in place there, as to maybe take kids out of the community, which has been a very interesting dialogue, for example, in the decision to repurpose these proceeds that we've gathered, which was scholarships. So meaning that we do not only want to set up scholarships right now that would take children from the local communities out of the village, but that also encourages them to maybe pay attention as to what can happen inside of the village. So as such, we've been able to start dialoguing with Paul Telfer about the CCC. Wouldn't it be interesting to speak to their wildlife guides and see if there's a mentoring program that has more relevance to the reality of the children and of the young community members of Mbomo, for example.
I think if I might add, sorry for interrupting, this brings us back to the initial moral of our talk is actually, you have to put, in order to avoid these crises, which will still be there for sure, they won't be gone, and challenges, you will have to put your ego aside. And we try to avoid putting too much ego into this project from beginning onwards. Nevertheless, we try to push forward and to fulfill our vision, but not with an ego, having a clear goal in mind and shooting for it, but listening to the people and then adjusting the whole process of the work to it. And in this way, we always look for authenticity and didn't trigger too much of a projection platform for I would say bad leaders, so to say, or wrong influences that would try to sabotage us or our partners.
There's a question on chat. Edward Lotz, will you be tracking the impact of your project on the community you worked with to see over time the difference it has made? Sorry, my phone. And continued making, tracking your own story.
The first that comes to mind is actually when we distributed the photos and the books in Lingala, and we left Mbomo again. Carolina, one of the educators at the Sansa Bobimba kindergarten, said, you have to send more books. Everyone is coming here and they all want the books because they want to read their stories. They want their parent to read to them. And actually also, please correct me if I'm wrong and if I'm over exaggerating now, maybe euphorically, but from what we've heard, the school assignments actually picked up drastically because people wanted to be able to read these stories. And this for us was, the biggest outcome that this project could have had.
Yeah, we understood correctly. There had been a quite significant increase as to the amounts of parents that were sending their kids to school as a direct result of really wanting to learn to be able to read the stories. And at the same time, another answer to the question of measuring our impact, this is definitely something that we are spending quite a lot of time to gain more understanding about, because as we said, that what we've learned at the point where we were at was that this was not so much a media campaign effort, rather than it was a humanitarian effort as to combining these things. We really find it very, very important to make promises that we can keep, which is a thing that we also directly copy pasted on our methods from the Sabine Plattner initiatives in the region. And this means that for Mbomo, we will continue to have an engagement. We want to start a scholarship program for the children that have been a part of our journey, and we want to be able to really understand the social science to what is important in communities like this. And we can only do that by keeping close collaboration with the people that are there and the organizations that are there, which are the CCC, of course, and also the Sansa Mobimba School. And we really are committed to to keep an eye out. We are very invested in the work that we started, and this is not something that has been done and will now fizzle out. We will every year calculate the proceeds that result from selling pictures if they happen to be sold, and there will always be a return of these proceeds.
Steffi, I'm going to unmute Paul. I'm not sure that you know what Paul is going to say now. Neither does he know what he's going to say now. Paul,
okay.
Because of this question, please tell them what happened when you handed the book to Minister Henri Jombo.
Yeah, well, again, you know, the book in itself, the fact that it's written in French and Lingala, the original book that was distributed to the communities, is already a testimony to the fact that the project was listening to the people. It's not in English. It's not in the languages that are published throughout the world. It was actually in their local vernacular, Lingala. And when I handed the book to Minister Jumbo, he looked at it, he says, "This is beautiful." And he opened it and he looked at the text in Lingala and the stories, and he was quiet. He just sat there and he stared at it, and he looked up and he looked at me and he looked at Chris and Sabina. We were there, and he just said, "Thank you." And it was from the bottom of his heart. And it was just such a touching moment for him to be so appreciative of anything of this nature. And, you know, he's an artist himself. He's a writer. And the fact that this is something of Congo for Congo was so important. And again, you know, hats off to the team, because it was absolutely sensational, and it will continue to have an effect throughout the Congo Basin. And the demand for the book speaks for itself. It shows that these people know what they're doing. They may not think they do, but they really do. And congratulations, guys, because it's absolutely fabulous, I have to say. Proud to be part of this.
Thank you, Paul, for everything.
Thank you, Paul. Just want to check, there was somebody wanted to, Sabina, I see you've got your hand up, but you are muted. So I have to I'm pressing a button called unmute. Just look at the left.
Maybe
Okay,
she.
Sabina, I tell you what, I'm going to phone you, and then you can. Then we.
Maybe you can manage to unmute yourself.
I did it.
Yeah, just
I
unmute
asked her to unmute.
You just have to
Yeah.
accept it. No.
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
The phone version might be better.
Yeah, I'm going to do that version.
I think Chris has now muted himself. Oh yeah, there's the phone conversation going on. Yeah, in the meantime, let me see, there were more.
It's like a movie scene.
It is. I mean, this is a good scene. We gotta keep paying attention for the post-corona films we're going to be producing.
Okay, folks, talk amongst yourselves. Well,
Yeah,
do
we
it.
are.
All's good.
Thank you so much, everybody, for coming and joining this talk. It's been, I don't know, I can speak for the both of us that it's been such an incredibly humbling journey for Steffi and myself. And to be honest, we're extremely honored by a lot of the nice comments that you are given, and also obviously Paul are given, but what we both always tell each other is that we're not saving lives. We're not really, like, the only thing that we're doing is amplifying the importance of the work that you are doing in terms of really understanding what a national park needs and what the communities needs, and what's the community work, and what is the what are the conservation efforts that have to be put in place, and how do we fight illegal deforestation or poaching and things like that. And really, we just make the pretty pictures. So and we're very, very happy to be doing that, and we're very, very happy that we somehow managed to find a way to make that work, and that it's very much a combination of so many things and so many beautiful people that we were able to meet along the way. But it's very serving, and I know that Steffi is gonna do a list, like, oh, but we like building bridges. That's our favorite thing.
Yeah, well, we stick to the bridges. We always come back to that metaphor.
They always come back.
Okay, I've got the message, Sabine. Before I forget, we will allow you now to ask your question. I got the message. I hope Sabina gave quite a long story, and I'm like a translator that's got to translate it. If I understand correctly, what Sabina said is that when you look at this project, it goes through many, many layers. Whether it's the relationship with government, the relationship with the authorities who are involved in these communities, the scientific side, the educational side, the conservation side, and then very specifically the cultural side, that you have taken a local culture and embraced that and brought the cultural side in it. And this thing, now I'm adding a little bit what you said that you come with a Western mindset and you had to put yourself in that local mindset. She said, on top of that, if you look at the whole team who was involved, everybody on the ground, including the educational team, the Magda Bemejo, who's the researchers team, and the team who work with the tourism side, every layer was involved, and that's what she's very proud of. And you have connected all those dots. And so the mother is saying to the daughter and to Ifa, she's very proud of you having done that. And that's why the success is there. And I would like to say on her behalf, congratulations on something seriously significant you have done. Sabina, if you put up your finger, you can say, okay, that's what I wanted to say. And if you do this, then I know I said it incorrectly.
There's no okay. There's no direct response, Chris.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Sabine Rietmüller, I think you had a question. Rod, if you can take it. I also just want to check here. Yeah, thanks, Sabine. Rod?
Sabine, I'm trying to find you.
Unmute.
Open you up there. Sabine.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, I was so impressed by the language issue, which is so central to culture. And it's great that you did it bilingual. And now if kids go to school and they want to read and write, and well, which language is being used in school now? Is it French again? Which will destroy their culture. Language needs to be their own language. And you know, all around the world, we're having bilingual education. I was running a project in Peru for 5 years. Quechua and Amara children in the highlands being taught for 4 years to read and write in their own language and be taught Spanish as a second language. This was given a chance and homage to their own culture, which was a very old culture of the Incas and Amaras in Peru. Why is not the same movement happening in Africa? You know, I'm getting very frustrated. We have in Tanzania no chance to do that. In Kenya, they do have it in some first years. They teach kids with local teachers who speak the language, reading, writing in their own languages, though there are several languages. Is there any chance in Congo to propose something similar? That these remote schools, where kids are introduced to the world of reading and writing, which should be giving value to their own culture, their own language. And I mean, it needs some technical investment, it needs some advisory. It also costs money to have textbooks in their own language, but all this can be produced quite locally and cheaply. Is there a movement in Congo?
Yeah, I think I very much agree. I very much agree with what you're saying, and I think it's in an extension something that Steffi has also referred to during her talk, which was the realization for us during the collecting of the stories, which was that people found it quite hard to understand that what we were actually after was really listening to the stories that were being passed on within their generation. And we weren't trying to teach something, we weren't trying to impose something, we weren't trying to impose a religion or a certain way of behavior or anything, but we really wanted to listen. And the sad feeling that it's given us to really understand that this took some time for people to really wrap their minds around this. Now, when it comes to the language, I personally have had many conversations about this, and the conclusion that I have after that is that I'm not entirely sure about how much to push towards Lingala, because of the fact that there are so many different cultural identities. It turns out that Lingala is only one of the languages, and it has only become this language and such an important language due to the fact that it was a trade language. But this means that the way the language travels and the way the language changes along the river, for example, is vastly different oftentimes. And a lot of times when we spend time in Kinshasa or in Brazzaville, we found that I'd say more intellectual and even more privileged layers of the society, of the kind of African professional in these areas were like, well, maybe really pushing for the Lingala is kind of romanticizing this because of the fact that our languages and our cultural identities have been oppressed for such a long time, it's already really slowly starting to fade. Now, in our experience, our book was one of the most recent books that was actually published in an African language, but the way it's been received has been quite divided. Now, obviously, first and foremost, people have felt extremely respected by the fact that we tried to translate and also transmit these stories in the language that is most authentic to them. But it also started quite a lot of conflicts because we then were confronted with, wow, but in the Mboma region, Mboko is more often spoken. And how about Kikongo, which is far more often spoken in the south of the language? Now, again, as Steffi also mentioned in the beginning of her talk, we don't know so much yet. So we're not in our early childhood development anymore, we're really toddlers anymore.
Still primary school. Sixth graders.
Yeah, we can write and read a little bit. So this is an ongoing process, and what I do really appreciate of the current times that we're in is that this is a dialogue that can be taking place in a more mainstream setting. So we see initiatives on the African continent popping up, which really make themselves more heard in terms of fighting against the evangelization of their communities and the suppression of their culture and the suppression of their language, and to really a good example, what I find, is to really kind of look at our process and the things that we've learned is that Stefanie and I used to really enjoy using and marketing ourselves in our efforts to do good by saying, we would like to give a voice to the voiceless. And this made a lot of sense for us at the time. What we now know is that this sentence and this way of looking at it is quite crooked because people aren't voiceless. Everybody has a voice, but people are often not listened to. And so what we've changed it to is actually amplifying voices and creating a stage for voices that are often oppressed or marginalized. And this is a learning process. And that means that we should always take reflection moments and always have these dialogues and always make sure that, for example, there is space for the people that you work with from Peru or the people that you work with from Tanzania to voice their opinion about it, and that we listen to it rather than we theorize or romanticize what should maybe happen in our efforts to do good. Because even in our efforts to do good, we might be saying that we want to give a voice to the voices and feel really good about it without understanding that people don't go through life voiceless. So this makes sense, right?
Very well put, Eva. When can we see the next production? Well, the next production is The Tales at Home that I mentioned in our talk. It will be launched, not to put any pressure on my dear colleague Eva Vonk, but hopefully within the next weeks. We are busy shooting at the moment. The first episode and the second episode shoot will follow next week. So hopefully mid of August we will be, no, not mid of August, sorry, mid of September, Eva, right?
Beginning of September, but I'm
Beginning
happy.
of September. Beginning of September, we will hopefully happily launch our first pilot, which is suitable for kids up from the age 7 and 8. And of course, parents, teachers, adults.
Yeah, very important thing to add to that is that while Steffi and I were developing this new project, I guess a lot of things were happening. Amongst others, the demonstrations started happening. The Black Lives Movement, also here in Berlin, has been quite active, and it really brought us to this motivation to, in addition to releasing this educational content for children that will serve as a bridge between cultures. So initially we'll introduce children from all over the world to this storyline of Akezi, which in the backdrop will teach children so much about the biodiversity of Congo, the mythology of Congo, the different cultural identities in Congo, it will also offer them an interactive platform on which they can become pen pals with children from different cultures. And this is a very pedagogically correct platform during which there's of course, the cybersecurity and things that we're taking good care of. So children have a safe space to learn from and with each other. But we're also creating glossaries for parents from different cultures. And amongst others, in these glossaries will be roadmaps to talk to children about racism, and roadmaps to talk to children about climate change, because a kind of epiphenomenon of this time during which children are quite confronted with climate movements and Fridays for Future, a consequence for this is that it turns out that children are often depressed because they feel quite hopeless. So what we're gathering now, and what Steffi is actually making possible at the moment, is for us to gather a team, to recruit a team to create these glossaries. And these glossaries will not only be offered to children, but also to their parents, so that they can find a bit of a kind of safe space and even a forum to talk to each other, because it's quite a trying time. It's a very important time, and hopefully a time that will have a more positive future after. And what we're trying to do is, create infrastructure for people to educate themselves. Tales at home.
I'd really like to say, Stefanie and Ava, that really surprised me. I've seen the production and I loved it to pieces, but the commitment and dedication that you put into that, and the revelation to me of what you have done there. Even though I have seen the movie, I looked at it with dull eyes. I need to look at it with alert eyes now, and I love it. I love everything that you've done there, and I love the quote that you have there. Nothing about us without us can be for us. There is nothing about this, and this is a light bulb moment. This is the whole revelation of what I keep saying to my people. If we don't involve the staff, if we don't involve the local communities, we're going nowhere. And it's become the glowing themes through all these talks we've had. If you don't involve the communities, absolutely. If you don't give them absolute ownership of all these programs, you don't get anywhere. So without the community's buy-in and involvement, but this is it. If it doesn't involve them, if it's not about them, it doesn't include them. It's not for them.